Um, Good afternoon, everyone. It's either just noon or quite well into the noon, depending where you're coming from. My name is Mark Lawson. I'm director of the UC President's Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. For a little bit of background, I am actually a former fellow of the program. I was a fellow of the program back in the early 90s. But currently, I'm a professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive sciences at UC San Diego. So I split my time between my own professional academic research work and serving as director for the entire UC system. If you're not familiar, the UC system is 10 campuses. there are there are 9 undergraduate campuses and 1 medical school campus, health sciences, that's UCSF. And there are other medical schools and other professional schools throughout the system. And we're also affiliated with national laboratories, Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore, and Los Alamos. So that's what the UC system looks like, and that's the population of campuses and institutions that the President's Postdoctoral Fellowship Program will work with. So just to give you a little sense of this program and how it's been facilitating the advancement of faculty diversity, not only on in our system, but also in the in the nation in general. We have a number of partnerships. And these partnerships consist of, first off, helping other institutions set up an application review and award system. So we have a centralized system for fellows or prospective fellows to apply to not only PPFB, but to a number of other institutions as well. So that's University of Michigan, Colorado, a consortium of schools in physics and astronomy in California called the California Alliance, University of Maryland, and Carnegie Mellon, Minnesota. You can see the list here. And it's through this action and also through advising other programs that we try to support the institution and function of these programs, across the country. And with that goal, what we're trying to do is create a sort of common entry point for interested applicants, because although many apply to the UC California, what we notice is that applicants will apply to the UC and then apply to programs that are maybe more geographically located to where they are, because maybe they don't want to move as far if they don't have to. So, excuse me, I have a cold, so my voice is going to be a bit sketchy. And so we often get a lot of cross applicants in the program, and I think that's a sign that it's a good sign, because that means that we're sort of driving interest and application in the programs on a broader scale. And I'll give you a little bit of background about the program, just so you can kind of put it into context. The program has been around for a very long time, actually. It was established in 1984, and it was actually modeled after a smaller program that was initiated at the Berkeley campus in 1978. It had a particular mission statement that is to encourage outstanding women and minority PhD recipients to pursue academic careers in the University of California. That's our old mission statement. It's on our webpage, but in a historical context, because in 1996, California passed a constitutional amendment called Prop 209 that forbade the use of public funds for activities that are directly benefit people of particular race or gender groups. So public money had to be accessible to everybody. And so we changed our mission a little bit, and now it's in that second paragraph there. So I think it's important to compare these two bits of language. The postdoctoral research fellowships support our professional development and faculty mentoring to outstanding scholars in all fields whose research, teaching, and service will contribute to diversity and equal opportunity at the UC. So what that does is it turns turns the question of who's supported by this from the individual and what they are to the individual and what they do. And I think that's an important thing to consider, especially as institutions are looking at the prospect of the end of affirmative action based on potential Supreme Court rulings. So I'd just like to remind everybody that this program's been operating under those conditions, for well over 20 years now, and 26 years, 27 years or so. And so it hasn't hurt the program, and when we've done well. It's had us change things a little bit, and we can discuss that in questions because I think that's actually a rich ground for discussion. So, but anyway, this overall language is really looking at people in the context of what they do to advance this mission at UC for what we call inclusive excellence. So the program structure overall should be interesting, because if your institutions are thinking about these programs, we have about 5.4 million in direct funding from the UC Office of the President. It's actually a unique type of funding. The University of California is allocated a portion of its budget from the state general tax revenue fund, and the money supporting this program comes off that fund. And interestingly, it comes off at the top. So essentially, the money for funding this program is allocated and provided to the program prior to any distribution to the individual campuses. So it's called an off-the-top allocation. There's very few things that are treated in that way. One of the new schools of medicine at UC Riverside is funded that way. A couple other important initiatives. Everything else below that is subject to the vagaries of budget increases and decreases. But this program is fully funded annually through that mechanism, and that was an intentional structuring of the program back when it was established. So I report to the Vice Provost for Academic and Personnel. So we're essentially in the third level of system-wide administration. There's the President, the Executive Vice President and Provost, and then there's the Vice Provost for Academic Personnel, and that's the office that this program exists in. Potentially it could exist here or in the graduate and research division, but because postdocs are academic appointees at the University of California, this is where we're housed. Our program is hosted on the Berkeley campus. So we have a small staff. We actually run our program with 3 staff members whose home campus is at the Berkeley campus. So as you might imagine, I'm in San Diego, so I spend quite a bit of time commuting between Berkeley and San Diego, which isn't as bad as you think, but it is a bit of a distance. We have essentially a unique professional staff that administers this program. So it's not done as an add-on or addendum to any other office or personnel. It's a distinct standing office to run it, and it's necessary to do that. Our program is of such a size that it would be impossible for this to be done as an addendum to anybody else's duties. So the fellowship program itself provides up to 2 years of funding, and we provide it at the appropriate salary for their stage. If you don't know, University of California had a series of strikes and new labor agreements in the last few months, actually at the end of the year. And so our postdocs are paid on a salary scale that actually exceeds probably most postdoctoral salaries across the country. So we fund at that level. And there are also stage and experience level places to be for salary, and we meet those salary levels. So we pay at least the minimum of what the appropriate stage salary is. We also cover benefits. We provide personal research funds and travel funds to the fellows so that they can travel to meetings, conferences, or engage in field work or other things that they need to do in order to prepare their research and be competitive for faculty positions. We have 2 meetings a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. The fall meeting is sort of a welcome return to our returning fellows for the second year. We do that program in Oakland. It's a 1 day long sort of career development program where we bring everybody in, um, have them come up to Oakland, spend the day. Occasionally people will spend the evening, but most people will stay just for the day. It's easy to fly in on Southwest Airlines, and use a hotel that's in Oakland, and it's very convenient travel wise. That program in the fall also welcomes another group of fellows that are called the UC Dissertation Fellows. So the Office of the President also provides a dissertation year fellowship to students who are dissertating, and it's intended to relieve them from teaching or RATA duties while they focus on finishing their dissertation. And we've got quite a population of that. So they join us as well, mainly, as you might guess, as a recruitment pool for the program. Now, there's a very important thing about this program and how it accomplishes its mission, and that's that fellows in the program qualify for a faculty hiring incentive. That's $425,000 that goes to the campus for every fellow they hire. I'll show you in a couple slides forward really what that impact is when you start thinking of a program like this. Those funds are, as I mentioned, they're state general funds, and they're really quite flexible for what they can be used at. So campuses are free to use that in any way they see fit. We don't put strings on it. There are no legislative earmarks or strings on it, except for some travel restrictions. Um, and it can be used either towards salary to help cover a funding gap in salary. If if someone's being hired off cycle and there's a gap for FTE availability, so it can help cover a budget hole. If that line's already funded, those funds are completely free to be used for startup packages for, say, hiring in STEM. They can be used to help create a partner hire, and all kinds of creative uses like that they can be used for. So it's a nice chunk of money it's almost a waste, I tell campuses, to use it on salary because it's so flexible. It can be used for other efforts. Some campuses even turn that money around and create a campus grant for people to apply to and get some money to advance their diversity and equity inclusion work that they're doing. So there's all kinds of ways to use it. The other important thing is it comes with a waiver of open search. Now, our system-wide academic senate, UC's got a governance structure that includes the executive, which is the Office of the President, and also the academic senate. The academic senate put forward a sort of a automatic qualification for a waiver of open search, so that departments don't have to create an open search in order to pursue a candidate that they see, and that's done under the understanding that particularly with smaller programs, it's very rare that a given fellow would perfectly match a given search in the year. But they're on the market and quite successful at landing faculty positions, which I'll get into. And so rather than requiring departments to do an open search, they qualify for a waiver, so they can pursue that candidate directly. So you can see between the hiring incentive and this waiver of open search, there's the capacity for departments to sort of strategically manipulate timelines, budgets, and other aspects that they can, or need to, scare up some startup funds, using these two components. So there are a couple of tools that help facilitate that. So just for details about the awards, I think it's important. The program I said it's a 2-year fellowship. It's 1 year renewable for a second. So we do have some accountability in the program. You can't just be a fellow and then coast it. There's a 1-year review assuring that you've done the things that you're supposed to do in the program, accountability for participation, and other things. And having this built into the program is actually quite important, I think. The research funds are $4,000 and another $1,000 for program travel. And then we also provide some funds for intercampus travel. Often Fellows will have co-mentors or collaborations with people at other campuses, and we'll cover the travel. Sometimes they just want to go to the campus and present a talk, and they can use those funds to get there if they'd like. The other big event meeting that we have is a spring academic retreat, which it's actually coming up in April. It's the third week in April every year. And that's a 3-day long retreat up in Lake Arrowhead, which is in the mountains east of Los Angeles. You may have heard it in the news lately. This is where everybody got buried in the huge snowstorms that we've got. And they were essentially cut off from the rest of Southern California for a bit. But there's a conference center in the mountains up there. We do extended one-on-one mentoring, practice job talks, and other activities up at this academic retreat in the spring. During the academic year, we do writing workshops. These are generally fellow-led. We try to create a tradition of fellows engaging in some sort of activity that helps them figure out how to balance, DEI work and other things. And we do writing workshops. This interestingly started kind of focused on the humanists, but it ended up extending all the way out to the STEM disciplines. So, our humanist fellows will put together this workshop. We'll provide funding to support it. And then lo and behold, every discipline imaginable participates in this. And we're really happy with that, because one of the foundational goals of this program is to create a community of scholars. And the more time they spend together, the better. As you imagine, that the geographic separation from all the UC campuses is quite large. And so it's very important that we take advantage of any opportunity we can to build community amongst the fellows. The hiring incentive, as I said, is $85,000 a year. There's a waiver of open search. What I didn't mention is we have a shadow negotiating team. Whenever any of our fellows are given offers from a UC campus, we put them in touch with a shadow negotiating team that's very experienced. We approach this from the understanding that, departments are very skilled at negotiating faculty positions, and this is the first and terrifying time for our fellows. And so we give them a coach, and they will help them negotiate. And it's sort of the root of the rumor that PPFP fellows are very shrewd negotiators for strong, faculty packages and stuff. And it's because there's generally an inside operator working on in there. So, but we don't name them. And then occasionally we have a STEM startup fund that's separate from the 425 or 85,000 for 5 years incentive. So when we can, we put together packages that will provide, say, up to 20% of a hire's startup costs towards their, and that can make the difference in a competition with a private, with a private institution that has more resources, or really helps make the difference in the attractiveness of an offer from one of the UC campuses. That's not ingrained in our budget, but we've been able to manage to keep that going for about 4 years now, and we're trying to get it institutionalized. As you might imagine, this budget climate, that's going to be quite an argument, but we're managing. Now, there's often a lot of questions about, who are fellows and who applies, particularly because we're operating in this sort of, affirmative action diminished environment, I guess, in California. And I'd like to kind of put this program in perspective. And I realize now that maybe these lines aren't, they're kind of muted and a bit difficult to interpret. So I'll kind of try to step through them a little bit with you. So let me get the old laser pointer up there. So this line up here is the number of domestic doctorates awarded to underrepresented minorities in the United States. So this is from the survey earned doctorates, the NSF survey on earned doctorates. And we can see, it's about, it's a little over 10%. Now, overall, we're about 60,000. So it's just like, 10, 12% are being awarded to domestic underrepresented minority doctorates. What I have in the bottom line here, and it's actually this line down here, what you'll see is the number of our applications that we get to the program. So we get enough applications into this program that it's actually a blip on the national scale of earned doctorates. Okay, so we get about 1,000 or so applicants every year for the program. It's another reason why we're very aggressive about trying to establish a broader network, because there's no way we can possibly fund this many people, but this line, this number probably represents a significant number of academically minded, um, underrepresented minority PhDs that are interested in pursuing, academic careers. And so, this makes up about, a good, 10 to 15% of that pool. And if you think about how many postdocs or how many PhDs actually transition into faculty in the nation, it's around that number. It's around 15% plus or minus, depending on what your study you're looking at. And so it's a very significant number that are interested in pursuing careers. And so, if you ever encounter the argument that there aren't any, or there's no candidates, this is a tremendous candidate pool. And if we and amongst our partners can attract this many applicants to the programs that we offer, then we really are identifying and targeting the available population in the U.S. in any given year. And I think that's a very important thing to consider. Now, for one of the academic years, we've broken down our distribution in percentages. We do have, as you see, about 30% African American, 26% identify as Hispanic or Latino. We have a substantial Asian, Alaska Native, American Indian, and Pacific Islander population is not great, but it's at least measurable and present. And we have about a 60, 60 plus, 30 plus differential between male and female in here. So we actually attract a lot of female application. And you can see these totals are coming from a population of about 1,200 applications we had in that year. So what I'd like to point out and help you keep in mind is that what diversity looks like in a particular discipline can really vary. Pre-Prop 209, we were exclusively focused on supporting African American and Hispanic or Latino fellows. And in fact, that's where I was in the program way back in the 90s. But now under this regime, we recognize diversity in a lot of different ways. In fact, that was almost handcuffing us in a sense. Now, gender minorities, are incorporated into what a definition of diversity may be. Females in physics, math, and astronomy need to break through in those disciplines, so that can be considered as diversity. White males in feminist studies, all kinds of things you can imagine. What diversity looks like or what it needs to be in various disciplines really varies. And in this sense, it's really important that we recognize that. The other thing to think about is that this hasn't really hurt our applications to the program from underrepresented minorities. Those that are in the strict, say, affirmative action definitions, that's still about 3/4 of our applicant pool. I think the reason for that is that our selection process is about what people do, and it's more likely that people who are engaged in their communities, doing outreach, doing mentoring work, and doing that are themselves from those communities. That's a common sociological phenomenon, and so there was a lot of doom and gloom about what this was going to do to the program in the 90s. We took a temporary hit until kind of word got out, but really the program survived that. And my advice to people now who are confronted with the potential of working a program like this or establishing a program like this is to actually just to trust the process. Trust how you're selecting applicants, trust what you're saying is important, and that population of people will be in the applicant pool, and it doesn't need to be forced. So, we've been able to just survive it for 25 plus years, and still have a very strong representation in our pool, and I think that is important. Now, the root of that then becomes applications themselves and the selections. And one of the things we have, we try to have as much of a harmonized application across all of the partner programs that we work with. But it basically entails a research statement, and it's not a big one. It's 1,000 words. Just communicate what's important about the work you do. An education and background statement, which is where you can talk about anything you'd like, essentially. This is the prompt where people discuss, what sort of challenges they've overcome, what motivates them to be in academia. It's really an open format. It's a very powerful collection of essays when you see these every year. A letter from a prospective mentor. We require prospective fellows to identify a faculty member that's tenured in the UC system that they would like to work with. And that prospective mentor has to write a letter describing how they will participate in advancing the career of that fellow, how they're going to train them. So not just be a research mentor, but also be a career advocate, career mentor. And we also include writing samples so that our reviewers can have a chance to examine the scholarship. What we also do is have our applicants opt in for dissemination of their info to other opportunities. We'll be solicited, for upcoming searches from institutions, and we can then provide them with the names of our applicants, not just our awardees, but applicants in general, to be, targeted for recruitment for other opportunities, either fellowships or faculty positions. And by them opting in, then we're free to share the data. We have a 2-tiered review process, and this is important in thinking about what kinds of fellows we end up with. We have a first round review, which is it's actually 250 faculty or so now that are reviewers in or near the discipline of the applicants. We go through a matching process that we have partially automated and then curated afterwards. And we have a rubric for assessing the applications for all the faculty, because often we will encounter faculty who are willing to review but don't have experience in this. So we provide a rubric for that. Then we pass about 30% of the applications to a secondary review, which is 4 subpanels: arts and humanities, social sciences, life sciences, and math, engineering, and physical sciences. Quite frankly, that last panel, math, engineering, and physical sciences, has grown tremendously, and we may need to split off that panel into 2, because it's so broad now when you include engineering. But anyway, we prepare a list of selections of alternates, and then we come up with a fairly deep list of what we call unranked finalists. So they're all just a pool of finalists. And we take that pool and we refer them to the campuses that they wish to do their postdocs at, and ask the chancellors to fund them out of local funds. And so generally what will happen was PPFP will award somewhere between 35 and 40 fellowships a year, which, as you can see, is only 4% of the pool. But with this added input from campuses, which we call chancellor's fellows, that doubles that pool, because the average is about 3 to 4, 3.5, I think, is the average per campus supporting chancellor's fellows. So we essentially double our size, which brings us into a better, a better representation of the applicant pool, but still less than 10%. So it could use more. We also have a number of memoranda of understanding with different either privately or funded agencies or other things that will allow them access to our ranking list. So for instance, at UCLA, they've got some private funding that will fund people in African-American studies. So the Bunch Center, they have private funds that they want to support postdocs. So we have an MOU with them where they have access to our selection and ranking list, and then can select the highest ranking person in their parameters of support, and support that person as a chancellor's fellow. And so that allows access to that ranking process, which I really think is the core of the PPFP, is the trust that our faculty have in knowing that their colleagues are the ones that have selected these fellows. They aren't being imposed, they're being selected by faculty. That's a very important point to keep in mind. So then, we can get a little bit to outcomes on here. This program has grown tremendously over the years. Uh, it was sort of a bit stagnant, admittedly, for many years. Actually, post Prop 209, but we began to, the hiring incentive was introduced in 2003, but it was limited to 12 a year. There was a cap on how many. Well, that ended up being a counterproductive practice, and nobody wanted to be number 13. And so hiring would stop right around 10 or so. Uh, in 2013, then President Janet Napolitano put a temporary removal of that cap. And we can see starting then, 2013, that our hires prior to this, hires were like 7 or 8 a year, really minuscule. They started to creep up above that line. And then it was permanently removed here in 16, 17. And you can see hiring's really taken off since then. We've also had some budget increases there to support more fellows. So our pool's grown as well. Interestingly, there's a constant historical average, although recently the number is much higher. Historically, a little more than 40% of our fellows are finding tenure track faculty positions within the UC system. But another 30% are finding laddering positions outside the UC system. So we've got former fellows all over the country. And we're very supportive of them doing that and provide assistance for them in identifying positions. Fellows represent as a whole about 11% of underrepresented minority hires and about 3% of our total hires. That may not sound like a large number, but it's sufficient enough to sort of bend the curve of the rate of change in diversity in the faculty as you project that number out. So it's important to keep in mind. So you can see we're now, having, actually this number for 2023 was updated. I think we're around 15 or something now. It's sort of in the heat of hiring season, so this number is growing right now. But even during COVID, we still had strong growth of the program. And here's how our hiring looks across campuses, and you can see there's quite a difference in there. What you see is that it's going to jump out at you is the aggressiveness of our Irvine campus in hiring. Irvine is a large campus that was growing rapidly and has leadership that was very intent on at the chancellor level, very intent on creating a diverse faculty. It was was in the transition to becoming a Hispanic serving institution, and is. And so you can see over a 5-year period here, excuse me, that they've got 37 hires. They've hired 37 of our fellows. Now, if you want to take 37 and multiply it by $425,000, you'll realize that the campus is realizing, an advantage in flexible income as well. And so they're able to fund a lot of other strategic initiatives that support the DEI mission at the campus. So really the difference in that number from other campuses is leadership. It's really the chancellor, the provost, and the vice provost and academic personnel saying, we're going to do this. We're going to recruit from the PPFE pool. And something as simple as that, as providing the leadership, can make a humongous difference in what's going on. We can see the other campuses, the larger campuses, and generally it's okay. We're floating around, a little bit less than 10 per campus per year. Berkeley's a little slow, as you might imagine. It's always been a challenge to hire diverse candidates at Berkeley, but they're undertaking recently some real efforts to walk the walk now. And so there's a lot going on there. So the next 5 years, I think, will look much better than this past 5 years. UC San Francisco, because it was a professional school, medical school, they weren't eligible for the hiring incentive or anything. They've just become eligible for that. And actually some of the hires in 2023 are going to add to this scale as well. So they immediately took advantage of the program once it was available. And the other thing to take note is the Santa Cruz campus, which has 16 hires in that window. Santa Cruz is actually a very small campus. And if you normalize that by the size of the campus, Santa Cruz rivals Irvine in its aggressiveness of hiring. And there, too, the leadership at the campus is very vocal in utilizing this program. And again, underscoring the point that leadership really matters in accomplishing this goal. Now, there's a big question that comes up that addresses not only some of the stigma of affirmative action, overt affirmative action in programs, is the pushback that someone hired under the auspices of a program like that are somehow compromised. And they get viewed as a second-class faculty, as you're a diversity hire, you really earn your place this way. I mean, I've heard that in those exact words, from multiple corners of the institution. There's really a very, very strong, I would call it, a hangover from, the affirmative action days in California. And it's really been a barrier to hiring, in the sense that, everyone thinks, well, they feel like they're doing us a favor by hiring somebody, and it's not actually contributing to their their excellence in their department. But like I said, we're selecting 4 to 8% of the national pool of scholars that happen to be underrepresented minorities, and we're selecting them not only on their scholarship, but also on their engagement in their communities. That's part of the assessment of who gets selected as a fellow. And because of that, I think we're selecting people that are highly engaged in their institution. They're very involved in other aspects and understand very clearly their place in academia as a role model, as a mentor, and as someone who's understands their position in academia, and know that at a public institution, there's more to it than just doing research. So to help quell those, or at least look at it, this is a kind of experiment that you do, and you almost are afraid to, because you don't want those criticisms to come true. But it was something I thought was really important, so we had it done. Is that we followed, based on numbers, we had to set this up in a different way, but we looked back and followed our general assistant professor hires, so open search hires in the University of California at the assistant professor level in the 98-99 academic year, and looked to see where they were 10 years post-hire. Now, we chose 10 years so that we could accommodate extended tenure clocks for those that may have taken family leave, started a family and had leave. So we wanted to, look at a decent window. And also, that's also a transition point where the university does struggle with retention. It's the years where we start to lose faculty after they get promoted associate professor, they get recruited outside. What we did was we bracketed that with the hires in the PPF hires between 1998 and 2005. And actually, that last column, that assistant professor hire column, is not quite right. But what we found was that our PPFP fellows 10 years post-hire are still at the institution at a rate of 87% versus 76% for these cohorts of assistant professors. So the two right columns are the hiring cohorts from 98-99 and 2004-2005 in the assistant professor ranks. So in both cases, the fellows outperform their peers with respect to retention, which really means that it's a good return on investment for selecting fellows like this under these kinds of conditions and with this kind of support. They actually do succeed and sort of exceed expectations in general. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of things. I mean, we have a website. It's PPFP. You can you search that on the web. There's a hot link here. I think these slides will be provided to anyone interested anywhere. We produce an annual report every year where we report our hiring activity, our applicants, where they go. It's basically an accountability report. We publish it every year. And here's a link for it here, but on our website, we have it under a resources tab on our website. And we have an email address if you want to contact us for any information, so we can give you some assistance. So I think that's enough. I'm going to stop sharing, and then we will. We've saved some time for questions and things, so I'd like to be able to have time for that. Okay, so there's a couple questions in chat that I'll go to. I can see them here.
And I'm happy to help read some of those questions too, so you can focus on responding. But
Okay.
anybody who wants to maybe ask in person first, and then we can get to the chat. So Archie, I saw your hand up.
Well, I was clapping and giving him applause, but I'm happy to answer. I'm happy to answer a question, ask a question. So, Mark, thanks for a lot of this work. And I was going back to the application process, and I'm trying to understand when somebody applies to multiple institutes. Does it kind of work like the Common App, and that everyone's agreed to the same kind of application process, and you're clicking boxes, or is it a little bit more complicated than that for the multiple? Well,
it's slightly more. Excuse me, sorry. I just entered puberty, I think. So it's as close as possible, based on part. So things, we try to keep everything. There are variations for different institutions. Some institutions want also a chair letter. University of Michigan runs a program that is essentially a pre-faculty program, and so they need more documentation and things there, and because they're the candidate, they award fewer fellowships and they're examined, scrutinized a little more closely. But yes, as much as possible, it's a Common App so that the applicant is burdened as little as possible with trying to apply to these programs. Because, like I said, I think there's many more worthy candidates than there are fellowship opportunities, and we don't want to have impediments for that.
Thank you. The next question is, how can other systems and/or institutions become part of the partnerships you've developed?
You can contact us. Aside from this partnership network, we've also advised a lot of institutions in establishing a program. Most recently coming to mind, because I was there this last weekend, was ASU, Arizona State. So not just University of Arizona, but ASU. They didn't join our network, but we had a lot of discussions with them and how to set the program up and how it worked. If you're interested in joining this and driving applications to your program, you can contact our office. Essentially, it's an agreement between the Berkeley campus and your institution to have access to the data system. The data system we have is it's actually housed at University of California, and it's a HIPAA compliant secure data instance, so that there aren't any concerns about having people's social security numbers or whatever. It's done in a way that's acceptable generally, with anyone's concern about people putting personal information. And that's really, and it's a stored, maintained housing. We charge a fee that pays our. It's run in multiple parallel instances, so each campus can mess with their own system. But actually, all the data, we can access all the data from all the programs, which is a rich ground for some great study. And I'm waiting for the bandwidth to write a proposal, maybe to NSF to look at the population, but it hasn't happened yet. So, but it's very rich. But yes, just contact us and we can have discussions and advise.
Thank you. So the next question is, how does the waiver of open search work, and is it controversial at all?
It's interesting because you'd think the University of California was very uniform across, because we have a centralized office of the president, but we have this distributed governance thing. And the reason why this waiver of open search came from the academic senate was because it would not be accepted if it didn't come from the academic senate. The academic senate is the faculty representation, and they're the ones who want to make decisions about that. But even so, there was some resistance from some campuses, academic personnel offices, who were upset we're getting all these waivers, and then we have to go through and explain that, it's already been decided by the Senate system-wide that these are the conditions for qualifying, and we provide them with the policy statement from the Senate and do that. But there are pockets of resistance of qualifying. One of the things to think about is if you compare the PPFP selection process maybe to an open search. We announce a job and we get 1,000 applicants. So we have 250 faculty scrutinize this. That's the first screen search committee, right? And then another panel select a few awardees. What the Senate did was use that rationale. It said, look, these people have been scrutinized at probably a level that's much more rigorous than most searches go. And so what they said officially, they made the equivalence that if you were selected as a fellow, that's the equivalent of being shortlisted on a faculty search. That's the stance of the system-wide academic Senate. And so as someone who qualifies as a shortlister, that's the leverage for qualifying for a waiver of open search, because it's kind of becomes like, oh, there's this great person, we'd like to hire them in addition to whatever our search was, and so that's the rationale that was put forth for that. And I think, I wish I would have come up with that, but that's actually what the Senate committee came up with as the rationale, and credit to them, it was really their idea to do this, and it's really helped up tremendously.
It's a great way of posing the response to that. Thank you. Okay, so another question is, can you share the rubric that's used to assess the applications?
Yeah, I don't have it handy right now, but I think what I can probably do is provide it so that it can be distributed with the slides, and then you can have access to it. It may or may not be perfect, but it helps, and we can share it. And if you have improvements to it, report them back to us, because we'll take the input. So all right. Yeah, I think we got all the other questions. So, I have to, there is something I'd like to talk about a little bit, and that's about instituting a program like this. I mentioned that it's sort of languished for many years, not being really heavily utilized. So the program has a long history, but not a long history of impact. That impact has kind of come later, when things got kind of figured out. What I think helped to get the ball rolling with this program was essentially the retail politics aspect of discussing with deans, discussing with chairs and faculty that were reluctant or had questions or fears about a program like this, and how it impacted, with their choices of faculty and what they view as control over their colleagues and things like that. That's a whole interesting social framework to work with. And we can talk about, structures that interfere with the mission. But I think it takes a lot of soft touch to actually go through that, to actually have those difficult conversations with people about it. Data helps. That's why we use that data about the tenure and retention, because people will generally accept, at least start the conversation on accepting the data as it is. And the other thing is talking to departments about how they do searches. I've never been a fan of the narrow search. I see it more. My own discipline tends to have year-round searching at very broad levels. Like, we need a cell biologist. So that's pretty general. Others have this sort of imagination that if they hire a particular kind of faculty, it'll complete the coffee table puzzle, and they'll be the perfect department somehow because they hired a person in expert in art in the Paris salon in the 19th century or something like that. And so getting trying to get departments to think more broadly about, wait, don't you want faculty that students identify with and will sign up for the classes? Because you can hire someone in niche disciplines, and no one's going to care, and it's not going to do anything for the department. It's particularly when it comes to delivering the mission of education. And so it takes a lot of conversations with people to try to, the moral arguments, the cajoling about the data and other things, in order to get them to sort of buy into this idea. And so you can't, a top-down imposed sort of program is just going to get pushed back on. But if you go out and talk, one of the advantages might have been because I was a faculty member that, I know how to have those conversations where our previous directors were administrators and lawyers, and did not have any academic experience. And so didn't have the capacity to understand the nuance that occurs across disciplines. Archie, you had your hand up. I didn't want to forget you.
Yeah, I wanted to go a completely different direction. So if anyone had any follow-up questions about that, they should probably ask. So I'm going back, Mark, to something you said at the very beginning. I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. So the $425,000 incentive program goes to the department, or does it go to the? I just wanted to make sure I heard how it sounded to me like if a unit had funds to help support the faculty member, that $425,000 could be reallocated for other needs. Is that what you said, or did I mishear?
No, you're correct. So one of the things that went into putting this, so this, I'm glad you brought that up. The funds, the way it's worded and the way we do it is they're transferred because it comes from Office of the President funds. So we will have that kind of mechanism. It's transferred to the campus in their annual campus budget. In these $85,000 tranches to make sure that if that fellow leaves, then that stops. So so it's the accountability measure. So but it's not restricted. So these are what I mentioned are state funds that are not restricted for use. And so they can what we tell our fellows do is to ask what's going to happen with that fund. Is it going to fund my position, and if not, how much of it am I going to see in my startup package? So we do that. We tell department chairs, hey, when you hire someone, make sure you're seeing that money in your departmental budget. And so and then we track it up. So we make sure there's advocacy. And so we follow it up from that point of view to make sure it's actually benefiting the mission. Now, at some campuses like Irvine, for instance, the money stops. They hire on their already funded lines, their normal lines, and then that money stops at the vice provost's office, and then they use it for DEI grant program. Some cases they'll use it to fund lines that maybe have a gap, and they'll use it to support people in other ways, and so it goes towards that mission. In the past, I'm afraid, I'm a little suspicious that a couple campuses that money ended up as a chancellor's office remodel, because there wasn't that level of accountability built into it. But we've been trying to make sure that it's visible. And in fact, we have a collaboration with the Mellon Foundation that's actually expanded our number of fellowships in the humanities. I didn't talk about it, but they fund an additional 10 fellows in humanities. And they also provide a top off to increase that $425,000. But I am out because I'm in charge of where that money is going specifically, and I don't have the history. That's going straight to the dean of that school that they're hired in. And
so Mark, can I ask a follow-up? If you had to, this is somewhat of an unfair question given all the history of this program, but if you had to redesign it again, would you redesign the distribution of this $425,000 differently? Would you specify, for example, that some percentage of it at a minimum had to go to the, to different areas, and do some sort of allocation model and give a little bit of discretion, but say minimums or something like that?
Yeah, I'd have it, remember this was put in when there was still quite a bit of, resistance to these kinds of things. And so they took all the strings off it to make it attractive to the chancellors. I think if today we were doing that, we'd build in a little more direct accountability so that we can see and also say how that kind of funding actually makes an impact, and it's just not a dowry. So I think I would structure it differently now, and I would advise others to really explore that. Christopher.
Hey, Mark, good to see you. I have just a quick question. It's maybe in the weeds, but I think one big value of joining your partnership and consortium is having access, like you said, to applicants who've opted in for data sharing to sort of help with recruitment of faculty lines in the future. do you have a sense of like the percentage of your applicants who opt in to have their data shared? Like, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, it's quite high actually. I think I don't have the exact number, but I know we have that number somewhere. It's pretty good. There's quite a number. It's more than half, but I don't know exactly what it is that will do that. And you know, and it's nice to be able to pull names off that whole database rather than just awardees, to provide people with candidates. You know, I spend a lot of time saying, you know, don't say there aren't any, because I got a list, you know, and they're on the list. You know, and the other thing we also do, and I didn't talk about too much, was anytime something significant happens to our fellows who are now faculty, we publish it on our website, and we bring notice and send it around and stuff like that, because we want to build awareness of how really impactful these faculty are. I mean, we've got scholars that do some amazing work and are supported, have outside support. They're on TV, they're serving on government panels, they're in Congress, advising Congress, they're running expeditions and things. We want everybody to know that this is how dynamic this pool is, and this is what they're doing. You know, they write good books. You know, there's a lot to identify. I'd like to respect our time, but feel free to contact us about any aspect of the program. Like I said, we're happy to advise and or work on this partnership issue. Hopefully these things I take in mind about how these programs run a fine line from being hires being viewed as diversity hires in second class versus understanding that they're really premier faculty is really important. And the ways programs are structured has to recognize that they have to fundamentally address that at the outset and remind people that these are really amazing scholars. I mean, our faculty are, we continually get feedback about, they weren't aware that there was this much amazing scholarship out there, and so I encourage you to think about it in those terms when you're building programs.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate this presentation. We appreciate you and the audience for all of your amazing questions, and we're really appreciative to have you on the RISE-UPP team. So thank you all for your time here, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.